Welcome back, I'm Raiden from Blue Gaming, and today I'm doing my thoughts on video for Gundam Versus. Now, I know that I'm a bit late on this, but I haven't really seen too many people talk about this game, so I wanted to make a video on it. Now, starting out, what is Gundam? It is a mech combat manga and anime series that's been around for a very long time, and there is a bunch of different versions of Gundam. If you're wanting an actual detailed explanation of what the Gundam series is, or different series of Gundam, then you're gonna want to go somewhere else, because I don't know the whole history of it. But yeah, just know that it's mech combat and stuff. As to what Gundam Versus is, it is kind of the fighting game of the Gundam series. There's been plenty of other Gundam games, most notably being like the Dynasty Warriors version of Gundam. I don't remember the exact name of that, but then there's also some other mission-based Gundam games. This is really the only series of games based on Gundam that deals with just like fighting game mechanics and such. And this is the first time that's actually made it to consoles. From what I've heard, this has primarily been in actual arcade cabinets, and those are pretty much just located in Japan, so the Gundam Versus series really hasn't made it to a wide Western audience yet, and this is really the first time that's breaking into it. And overall, this is actually making a really great first impression. This is a very polished fighting game with a large number of different characters that I'll get into here in a bit, and a bunch of things that I actually really like about it. So starting off, let's go over the different modes that this game has with it. As for actual multiplayer fighting modes, there's 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3. In this video, you will see me use the 1v1 modes and the 3v3. I didn't really like the 2v2, as a bad teammate can really make those just suck, where in the 3v3, if you have at least two good teammates, or if you and one of your teammates is at least good, then you can carry through and still win the match, where with the 2v2, if you get hooked up with someone who's bad at the game, then you're going to have a less than stellar time. There is also a wave-based mode where you can just keep going on forever and ever, fighting different waves of enemies and such, and it's kind of what you'd be expecting for a wave-based mode. Then there is a series of what they call situations, I think it is. It's essentially you get dropped into a spot, there's a number of enemies, you defeat all those enemies, then you go to the next situation. And then you do that all again. There's 10 in a series, and there's multiple different series that they let you play through in the game. There's no real cohesive story in those situations, but it's just something to have you get used to a character in the game. And yeah, that's pretty much all the modes that are really in there. There's a practice mode too, where you can fight against whatever kind of opponents you set up, but that's pretty standard for all fighting games. Now let's go over kind of the character roster. There is a lot of different Gundams to choose in this game. In fact, in this beta, we were actually given 94 Gundam suits to play. Now, in this video, you're seeing me mostly play Freedom Gundam, where in the beginning, the first fight that you saw, I was using Heavy Arms Gundam. Then the second one, I was using Sananju, I believe it was, and then for the rest of it, I'm using Freedom Gundam. But there's 94 different Gundams that you can play as in this game, and they're all split up into 3 different categories. There's the melee-focused ones, the shooting-focused ones, and then the mixed ones. And then the mixed ones are also split up into being mixed but focused on shooting, which is what Freedom Gundam is. There's mixed but focused on fighting, and there's mixed with no focus on either. So there's a wide variety of different things that you can choose from, and it really lets you play in whatever style you want, because each of these each of these Gundams, while there is 94 of them, they each play slightly differently, so you can really find that Gundam that plays exactly how you want to. Granted, with there being 94 available Gundams, it might take you a little bit to find that said Gundam that you really like. For me, I was actually very lucky, and I found it after about my 10th try. I started out with Gundams that I liked from the shows, stuff like Unicorn and Wing Zero, Death Scythe, Heavy Arms, just different ones that I've seen in the shows. Eventually, I found my way to Freedom Gundam, and that's really the guy who I put the most amount of time into in this beta period. Now, there's a lot of different characters already. Went over that. The main difference in those, besides the different categories that they're put into, is they're given a point value. Now, this point value starts out at 200, and then you have some other suits that are 300 points, then you have suits that are 400 points, and then finally suits that are 500 points. Now, this comes up for how easy it is to defeat a certain suit, and it also plays heavily into how easy it is to beat you online. So, when you're on one-on-one fighting, you are given 600 points at the start. This is kind of your lives in the game. So say I was playing a Gundam that required 500 points. The one that I know off the top of my head is Unicorn Gundam. He requires 500 points. So you start off with your full amount of health. Then you're playing through and you're fighting, and let's say that you die. Your points then go from 600 down to 100. And that corresponds to how much health you're given at the beginning of your life. So when you start off the game at 600 points, you had your full amount of health. When you're down at 100 points, 100 is only a fifth of 500 points required for Unicorn Gundam. So you are only given a fifth of your health. You can see this in the second fight that I had back earlier in the video when I was using Sinanju. He requires 500 points. He was given a fifth of his health once I died. Now, thankfully, I was able to kill my opponent a second time during that fight, but this plays into a big dynamic in it. So you can have a Gundam that is 200 points, and that requires your opponent to kill you 3 times. Because 200 goes into 600 3 times, where if you have a Gundam that is 500 points like Sinanju or Unicorn, then you will have your first main life, and then you will only have a fifth of your starting life after you die. So this plays a super interesting dynamic, and you'll see a lot of the more serious players go for Gundams that are around the 300 point mark, and they do that because when you start at the 600 points, you have your full life. When you die, you're down to 300 points, which is equivalent to what your Gundam costs, so you have full life once again. And this plays an even bigger role when you move on to 2v2 and 3v3. In the 3v3 games that you're seeing me play, the team is starting out with 1,500 points. So if you're running with Unicorn Gundam, who costs 500, you are taking a huge chunk of that health away from your team if you die. So it plays a really interesting team dynamic to keep your higher point players alive, and it creates an interesting dynamic on one-on-one because you're trying to gauge how much health you're willing to come back in with. So that's a really interesting thing that I've not seen any other fighting game go with. Another thing that I really like how they did is the way that they did the different special moves and the use of guns and stuff. Now, guns are an integral part of this game. There's an entire category of Gundams being shooting-based Gundams. You're seeing the Gundam that I use, Freedom Gundam, is mainly mainly shooting based as well. And the interesting way that they did it is you have a set amount of shots for whatever special ability or normal ability that you have. Once you use all of those, they're put on a cooldown timer, which is essentially kind of like a reload timer. While that's reloading, if you have some sort of melee capability, you can always do that. And it's just kind of interesting how they didn't put an actual limit on the amount of times that you can use some special ability. You really just have to wait for that cooldown timer. And so that's something that's really, really interesting and really quite good in my opinion, as some of these more special attacks are really hard to hit with, and others are really hard to hit with and don't deal a ton of damage. So being able to miss really gives you a little bit of leniency that I think this game actually really needs. Mostly because we're in giant mechs and we're moving kind of quickly. Speaking of moving quickly, something that you'll see is that when you're aiming at an opponent, you're always locked on to somebody. This is required by the game. There's at no point where you're not locked on to an enemy. It's very easy to switch between enemies, so you don't have to worry about that being a problem, but you do always have to aim at somebody. And this might be kind of difficult to get used to, because movement is heavily tied into how you're locked onto an opponent. It's not the normal movement of forward, back, left, and right. It's the typical forward and backwards, but there's also your side-to-side movement is actually moving in a circle around your opponent, depending on who you're locked on. And movement gets even weirder as there's boosting, and once you're boosting in one direction or another, you're given full directional movement. So you're no longer stuck into this semicircle movement from side to side. You can actually move in any direction, and that's just kind of difficult for some new players to get a hold of. So it really requires a little bit of practice to get your movement down as good as you would want to. Now, the final thing that I'll end this off with is kind of talking about the combos in this game. Now, this game has some pretty simplistic combos. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is forward X, then square, 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 square. It is the simplest combo that I've pretty much ever seen, and pretty much all the combos follow that particular way. It is move in a particular direction. It's usually either move forward, move back, or move side to side are the three different movement modifiers to an ability, and then hit the button a number of times. The standard shot, or the standard shooting button, is square on the PlayStation, and then the standard melee button is triangle on the PlayStation. So for your melee combos, it's usually hit a direction and then hit Y or hit triangle a number of times. So they're not the most intensive combos. Like, you don't have to know a whole bunch of different button presses like Tekken or something, but it is it's intensive enough that you actually have to know it and practice it slightly, but it's not so intensive that it is difficult to pull off without a fight stick or something, which this game can totally be played with a fight stick. I've seen it done, but a controller works just fine. So I know I've been rambling for quite a bit, so I'll end the video off here. Overall, I really like the time that I put into Gundam Versus, and I will most likely be picking it up when it comes out later this month. As of now, I don't really see a reason why I wouldn't. Something that I do want to look out for is the player count, though. If the player count starts off low, I don't really see it being that high afterwards, and that could be a problem with how somewhat unknown the Gundam series is to a larger Western audience. So that's going to be it for this video. Remember, I'm Ryan from Blue to Gaming, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.